What's up, film world? Welcome back to episode 16 of The Dark Room, where two blind cinephiles illuminate the sighted. I'm Lee Pugsley.
I'm Alex Howard.
And this is a podcast hosted by two legally blind guys for film lovers of all abilities. So last week we had our good friend John Stark, Mac the Movie Guy. You can follow him on YouTube. He's a blind film critic, and he was joining us for episode 15, where we started discussing Christopher Nolan's filmography in chronological order. We actually recorded episode 15 and this episode at the same time. So we're just going to jump right back in where we left off, and we're going to the year 2010 with Inception. And another film that had a very big cultural impact is Inception, which is the next Nolan film, which came out in 2010. This film will be a very fun one to discuss.
All right, so the audio description where it's available for Inception is Google Play, iTunes, and Prime. So I don't know that I've ever seen this with audio description, but as John was saying, we were comparing The Dark Knight to it's this generation's Infinity War and Endgame. The 1-2 punch for me was Dark Knight and Inception. Inception it's my number 2, almost as impactful as The Dark Knight, not quite there, but it was still mind-blowing cinema to me. There's the ambiguous ending, everything about it. I love this movie so much. Just the different ways he plays with time and dreams, and it went places in movies and in my imagination where I never even thought of before. It's inventive, the hallway scene with the practicality of turning the room it's all, like you said, Nolan loves practical. The score in this is iconic. It's just, once again, he just keeps putting out bangers. It's awesome. I absolutely love this movie.
Yeah, it's a fantastic film. Yeah, that hall room scene, he actually built the rigging so that he could rotate that. Nowadays, we just green screen things like that all the time. So exactly. It was so nice to see him. I've actually seen I saw like a making of that actually showed what that thing was, and I was like, wow, he built this, so that they could actually rotate that set. And I think they had them on cables too, just for safety purposes, but they actually did rotate it. And I unfortunately did watch this without audio description, and it is totally unwatchable without audio description. I mean, wow. I mean, it's just like sounds, because they're in a dream world for like most of it, and things happen, and they just kind of happen suddenly, like they would in your dreams. Things just sort of happen, and you don't really know what just happened. Like a building just fell over in the background or something, and it's just a sound effect. And without audio description, it was such a weird experience, and I would never recommend that to anybody. Even with how great Inception is, there's too much that relies on visual. At least Memento is story-based. This is very much Nolan really just relied on his ability to create this magnificent dream world and tell that story. I think the acting here is phenomenal. It has a fantastic score. I loved that Nolan got to work with DiCaprio, and the two of them turned this movie out. I think DiCaprio is fantastic here. I think Marion Cotillard is fantastic here. And this is also Nolan's first Best Picture nomination. He did not get a director nomination, but at least he got the picture nomination for Inception. It was like a long overdue, but he got it. So yeah, Inception is my number 3.
I think getting a Best Picture nomination sort of solidifies like Spielberg started being that director where it's popcorn, but it's also considered artistic and honored by the Academy. And I think Nolan is also that director where he can put out a big summer blockbuster tentpole and then have it also be a Best Picture contender.
Yeah, I agree with that. That is where the game started to change. The Academy really starting to notice Nolan and how masterful his work is. That being said, I'm going to throw out a very big hot take for you guys. I am in the minority on this one, but Inception is actually lower on my list. It's at number 9. So I'll just throw that out there. You guys can process that for a moment, and then I'll explain more. I think that the concept was absolutely brilliant. And on paper, everything is brilliant and it should work perfect. And for many people, it does. But to me, this is a great example of a film where the parts are greater than the whole. The sound editing, the sound mixing, the score, the acting, the cinematography, everything about it, the production design, all of it. It's incredible. The craftsmanship of this film is wonderful. However, the biggest issue for me being able to fully enjoy the film was I felt like there were a lot of characters in the film and they introduced them really quickly, and I didn't feel like I connected with any of them. And then they kept throwing more characters at you, and I just never felt like I was going on a journey with any of the characters, and I wanted to, I really did. And then, when you have the emotional moment that I know a lot of people felt that emotion, I didn't feel it because I just didn't feel attached to the characters' journeys by that point in time. And so I was just kind of like an observer watching through a window what was happening, but not really feeling like I was a part of what was going on. It's obviously not a bad film. Like I would be remiss if I were to sit here and say this is a bad film. It's not a bad film by any means. It's actually a very good film. It just did not work for me the way that it has worked for other people.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think about Inception specifically now that I'm blind. There's some films that just don't work for me in the same way anymore. And I really want to hear it. I know it'll float its way back to a streaming service. And I really want to hear it with audio description. I am so intrigued at what the narrator does with that final shot, because that has launched so many debates. I feel like there are like 500 YouTube videos just dissecting the final shot of this film and like what it means, and what the fact that I didn't get to watch this with audio description it's killing me, because I really want to know what the narrator chose there. And I feel like sometimes with a film like this, it's possible that the film may not work the same way for me as it did when I could see it. So far, I've only ever ran into one film that I absolutely truly loved, that the audio description just can't capture the magic of the film.
Which film is that?
But it was WALL-E for me. As much as the audio description, I've actually seen it twice with audio description. I love WALL-E so much, but without being able to really truly capture all of the little movements that the two leads are nonverbal. All they do is say each other's names. So everything is based on, just a little flick of the eye or a little reaction of the neck. I mean, the audio description would have to be so over the top to get every little movement that these two are doing. And it just doesn't work for me. WALL-E made me cry in theaters. First time I saw it, when I lost my vision and saw it for the first time with audio description, I felt nothing. And that was an indication to me that this experience had changed. And I wonder about Inception, but obviously without audio description, it was a completely different experience. But I'm still going based off of how my initial feeling was on Inception and whether or not I would recommend it for anybody else. So,
Lee, have you seen it with audio description or no?
I have not seen it with audio description. When I saw it, my vision was better than it is now, and I was able to pick up on the majority of the visual things that were happening. Like, I feel like I understood, and I saw it a few times. I feel like I understood what was going on as much as you can understand a Nolan film. I was hoping that the second time I watched it, I would feel differently about it, and I didn't. I would love to see it with audio description to see if there is anything new to add to the experience and to see if that changes the way I feel about it now.
You said it was your number 9?
It's my number 9. Once again, I realize it's a very controversial opinion and a hot take for many people. I get in arguments with friends about this quite often.
So what's next up for us, Lee?
Next up is the last movie in the Dark Knight trilogy, The Dark Knight Rises, which came out in 2012.
The Dark Knight Rises is available with audio description on iTunes, Max, and Prime. I like it. It's number 9 for me on my list. I don't love it, but I like it. I think there's nothing new in it. I think like it's Nolan, it's what you expect, but there's nothing that blows your mind in it. I was a bit disappointed with it when I first saw it. I think the most disappointing thing was that they said Robin at the end. You don't need to say Rob. Like, we know he's Robin. I mean, that's just a nitpick, but I do think like it's still solid. It's still good. There's no Nolan movie that I absolutely hate. It was just a little underwhelming considering we had The Prestige, The Dark Knight, and Inception back to back to back, and then this one came out.
I'll add on to that. I think that out of the Dark Knight trilogy, The Dark Knight Rises is probably the most sloppy or messy of all three of those movies in terms of just the narrative that it tells. It's fine, and it's not necessarily a horrible way to end the trilogy. I do think that there are some very solid action sequences in that movie, and it was an enjoyable watch. It's just not elevated as much as the other two Batman trilogy movies are. And it's number 8 for me. So I didn't hate it, and I would watch it again. I watched it a few times, but there was just nothing overly memorable about it to me.
And I do think the sound mixing started becoming a little bit more of an issue in this one too, with understanding what Bane said and all of that. And I honestly, I felt like there's something missing, and I think it was Heath Ledger, because Scarecrow came back. I think the plan was to have the Joker get out of jail just like the Scarecrow did. And I think I miss Heath Ledger in this movie.
Tom Hardy as Bane, though, is really excellent. Solid performance.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, Tom Hardy's Bane is easily the reason why I love this film. I mean, I know they make fun of his voice, especially in Harley Quinn. Tom Hardy took a character that stood next to Uma Thurman and just kind of like grunted. I mean, that was all he did in Batman and Robin. And he made him into this like really complex, intelligent villain, and had this really unique voice that doesn't sound like anything Tom Hardy's ever done before. It was like he took the challenge that Heath Ledger had laid before him and ran with it. Like Heath Ledger really did a performance that was unlike anything he'd ever done before and really committed to the character. And I feel like Tom Hardy did that with Bane. I would have given him an Oscar nomination for this. I think this is the divisive one for me, because I know people don't like The Dark Knight Rises that much. The only thing to me that over bothers me about this film is when when Bruce is down in the hole, and they have a TV down there. And I'm like, how did they get the TV down in this hole? Where do they have the cable? And I'm like where does this thing come from so that you can watch the news about Gotham? Like, I don't, that part of the film for me always is like, this is supposed to be like the hole that nobody climbs out of, but somebody climbed down and installed cable. Where did this TV come from? Anyway, but aside from that one thing where Chris Nolan was like, I think this will be cool for effect, and I don't think he really thought out what that means in the long run. I love the film. Visually, I watched with audio description for this, and I need more. I need more from the stadium sequence. That is just kind of just like, when you watch it, you're just like, oh my God. And then for a blind audience, it's like, well, that happened. No, it doesn't feel like it's not really well described. It's just sort of like this thing. Yep, there's a hole there now. That's okay. Thanks. I mean, it was this kind of a big moment. They used it in the trailers, and there's this huge buildup to it. And then I just kind of felt like they passed over it in the audio description. I think everybody's great. It takes a great angle for Christian Bale. I mean, he really just does not care. He's barreling to death. Like, he is just all the way. He's like, if I die, I die. It's interesting to see that. And Michael Caine gives such a great performance when he walks out on him and he's like, I can't be here to watch you die. I think that's a beautiful performance from a character that's evolved over 3 films. I actually love Anne Hathaway as Catwoman. I thought she was great here, and really brings a lot to the film. And Gary Oldman obviously is dealing with the complex emotions from having to constantly run around and tell everybody how great Harvey Dent is. Yeah, there's a lot here that I love. I don't know. Maybe I'm a sucker for Batman and Tom Hardy's Bane, but this is my number 5. So I think that's my controversials. I think I have this higher.
I forgot about Anne Hathaway. She's really good in this movie too.
Yeah, and I think honestly, a lot of my enjoyment played into, you have such high expectations, like I said, after these other movies, but it is still a great movie. I mean, I think a good Christopher Nolan movie is a great movie compared to anything else.
And for any of these movies, like as we rank them, even like the number 11 or 12, that doesn't mean that it's a bad movie or poorly made. But as for everyone, we all have our preferences. They're still all very good movies that I would recommend anyone watch any of these movies.
Definitely. So what is next on our list, Lee?
Now we come to 2014, which was Interstellar.
So I just rewatched this one. I used to really hate on this movie. The first time I saw it, it was IMAX at City Walk, which is like the true IMAX screen. I was like towards the front, on the side. It was not a good viewing experience. I did not have fun with this the first time. So I rewatched it for this show, and I really, really love this movie. I think this is one of those movies where, you know, upon second watch, you appreciate it so much. I love the stakes he makes, it's so sciencey, which I really love. But beyond that, the stakes are unbelievable. He lost all that time on the planet and he's trying to get back to his kids before they pass away. It's like the stakes are so high, and he is so good at creating these otherworldly stakes for these characters and having them argue and make it feel real. It is so good. My one issue with the movie, the bookcase thing, some people really like. I think it's pushing it a little bit with maybe I just can't wrap my mind around that whole concept, but that takes it away a little bit for me. It's my number 4 only because of that ending. But I think the stakes and the feelings, the acting, it's the science of it. It's just all so good. You can watch it with audio description on the DVD. It's on Google Play, it's on iTunes, it's on Paramount Plus, and it's on Amazon Prime. I actually just watched it with description on Paramount Plus, which was very interesting because I think there were scenes, especially like the space scenes are beautiful. And I think the audio description did a pretty good job of keeping me into it. I think there are some parts with characters that look alike, so it helped me keep track of people and all of that. So I think the audio description did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I just watched this in July, and I just want to give a shout out because I did watch it with my Prime subscription on Amazon. And yet it's possible that it left Prime on August 1st. This film does have fantastic audio description. The moment that always comes back to me is really well described, and it's just Matthew McConaughey just giving just like 100%, just like full on crying.
When he's crying at the screen.
It's just such a heartbreaking scene. I remember seeing that visually in theaters, and it's just, that is the moment where you feel everything in that one, and he feels everything, and he's so good in that. Again, another missed opportunity for a nomination. I think Matthew McConaughey for Interstellar that absolutely could have pulled off a nomination here. I don't think anybody would have blinked about it, but we moved on from this. The only thing about Interstellar, and yes, definitely watch this twice. This is another one like Prestige and Memento, where when you watch it the second time, you'll find all of the layers that you weren't necessarily looking for the first time around. You'll see them, and you'll see Nolan's craft in it. The only thing about this for me is that it does feel longer than it needs to be. And I think there's a better cut of this film that's 5 to 10 minutes shorter. I think out of the first act that goes on for a little while, I don't think we needed as much of that as we got. I think if Nolan was being honest, he probably could have done a 5 to 10 minute shorter cut, and the pacing just would be a little bit better. And aside from that, I mean, it's, again, the actors just line up to work with him. This guy gets amazing scores. He focuses so much on sound design that his sound design is amazing. I wonder how much he couldn't possibly have done all practical effects here, because this is not one of those kind of films. So I'm sure some of this was actually actual CGI for the first time, for certain, that I could say that in a film of his. But it's just the pacing that has this down. This is my number 7.
One more thing about the audio description for me, it's funny. I don't remember the robot in it at all the first time I saw it. And I'm sure I was aware of it because he talks. I don't think there are many shots of just the robot rolling in the water or changing shape. So when I saw it with the audio description, I was like, oh, like I never knew that this was even here during this movie. So, I mean, that added to my experience, even though I saw it with better vision back in 2014. I mean, I've never had perfect vision, so I think I probably missed that whole part of the movie.
Yeah, the voice work on that character is so good too, that if you didn't have audio description, you might not know it's a robot, because it's so well done, the voiceover work for that character.
I did watch this movie with audio description. It wasn't recently, it was a few years ago, but I remember the audio description being pretty decent. There was nothing that stuck out to me in a negative way about the audio description. I felt like I was able to catch everything. And this was, I'd seen the movie before without audio description as well. But the movie itself, I really enjoyed this movie. I think that It is possibly Christopher Nolan's most emotional movie. It really just hits hard when it does hit. And the scene you were talking about, John, with Matthew McConaughey, just like breaking down, like that's my favorite scene in my favorite moment in the movie. And I was tracking with his character and just with the sacrifices that he was making the whole way through. So different from Inception, I actually did feel the emotion and did feel the connection with Matthew McConaughey's character. And I think that this is probably my favorite Christopher Nolan score and one of Hans Zimmer's best scores in general too. Just what he did was so creative, and there were a few little nice musical innovations that he threw in there. Visually, from what I was able to pick up on, there's some really stunning visual moments in this film as well. I do agree that the pacing does drag just a little bit at certain parts, and a shorter version would be preferred. But all in all, I'm a big fan of Interstellar. It's one of those movies that I've been happy to see has become more beloved over time. I think when people first watched this movie, they were just kind of like, it's okay, or it wasn't their thing. But over time, as people have rewatched it, myself included, I think that everyone's grown to love it a lot more, and that makes me really happy. And so for me, this is number 5.
And I think the sound design was once again a little rough, but I mean, it's always a little rough with Nolan, with the dialogue not being loud enough, but especially with the audio description mix too. I think some of these have a hard time balancing the narration voice with the dialogue, with the music, with the sound effects.
Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from, and I've definitely felt that way too.
What is next for us? I think we only have about 3 more.
We are at 2017, which is Dunkirk.
So you can watch Dunkirk with audio description on DVD, iTunes, Max, and Prime. I need to watch this on Max, honestly. I didn't rewatch this before we did this with audio description. I actually ordered the Blu-ray of it, and it came, and it was from England. And of course, you can't play that here. And not even the digital code works. So I need to go on Max and watch it, but I have only seen it without audio description. And so Dunkirk is my number 10. I was very lost without audio description. I think this was in a time where I should have been using it, and I hadn't started using it yet. It's just so much with the different time, each character's in a different timeline. I didn't know that till the end of the movie. They're all white men. It's a rough watch if you're low vision or blind without audio description for sure, which is probably why it's so low on my list. I mean, it is gorgeous cinematography wise, but I do need to revisit it, I think, to get the full picture with audio description.
It's imperative, I would say, to watch this movie with audio description for anyone who's blind or low vision, because there's not a lot of dialogue in the movie, or hardly any at all. And if you don't have audio description, you're going to be very lost. Fortunately for me, I did watch it with audio description. I appreciate Nolan trying to give us a sense of what war is like and just kind of putting us in there with all of these characters. I think for me, though, it didn't really work because, once again, I'm a very big person on connecting with characters and giving me characters I care about. And even though the audio description did a good job of describing everything going on, there just weren't characters to really follow or get invested in. So I felt very disconnected from everything, even more so than Inception, I would say. But then you think of like movies like, 1917 or All Quiet on the Western Front. Those movies did a great job of depicting war, but also giving me characters to care about. I mean, Dunkirk was technically brilliant. And what really stuck out to me, even with the limited vision that I had then, which I still have now, is the color palette. It was just really a really vibrant color palette in a lot of different ways. And the cinematography has some really nice shots. The score, once again, Hans Zimmer, always good. But beyond that, I just didn't care that much. And I was ready for this movie to be over. That's why it lands at number 10 for me.
Yeah, he really does use color grading on this film, probably even more so than he has in other films, to where it's pretty distinct. I'm glad you brought that up about the color grading that Nolan uses for Dunkirk. I've only seen this film twice, and I saw it once before I could see, and then I've seen it once with audio description. And if you're going to watch it on Max, I notice it's in my leaving soon row on Max. So I don't know if it's leaving at the end of August, but I would get up on that and watch Dunkirk. I don't know what they consider to be soon, but they say soon. What I love about this film, because I love really most everything Nolan does, what Nolan does is he uses tension. War films quite frequently, they get you by using gore, by using the horrors of war, whether it's, decapitated heads on pikes in Apocalypse Now, whether it's, the guy that's holding his guts in the first couple of minutes of Saving Private Ryan, whether or not it's the guy that's on fire in the most recent All Quiet on the Western Front, and that's having to watch him slowly burn. It's all about the horrors of war. But this one, even though people die, it's not glorified. He's not trying to show you somebody missing half their face or somebody walking around holding their arm. He's not trying to show you that. He's trying to build situations in which you feel like if something doesn't happen soon, something terrible is going to happen. And it's that tension that he's able to hold. And it's actually, this film isn't even 2 hours. Like, this is where Nolan knows his runtime very well, because he cuts this down. It's about an hour and 45-minute film. Nolan films are usually pretty long, so he knew exactly how long this film needed to be in order for him to hold that tension. He knew he couldn't do it for 3 hours, that he would lose people. And he uses a predominantly unknown cast full of people. Interestingly enough, this is Barry Keoghan is in this. Long before he got his Oscar nomination for Banshees of Inisherin. He's one of the random faces that's in this film, in addition to, I think this was the acting debut of Harry Styles. So
I forgot Harry Styles was in this.
Yeah, a lot of people, in addition to, of course, Mark Rylance and Kenneth Branagh and Tom Hardy. I love the tension in it. And I think what the audio description brings out that's so important for blind people, the narrator uses character names so frequently that it actually makes it easier to follow the characters with audio description, because they are kind of nondescript. Like, you're watching, because we're so used to seeing actors. When we're visually, we have that visual recognition, and we're so used to seeing stars in Nolan films. We're so used to seeing these massive stars, and we instantly look at their faces and we go, yep, that's DiCaprio, yep, that's Christian Bale.
Or even like hear their voices.
I have no idea who you are. And suddenly I'm supposed to follow you. But I didn't know who anybody was in All Quiet on the Western Front. That was my favorite film last year. So I don't think you need big actors necessarily to carry a film. I think you just need a great director and great story. My only thing with Dunkirk is the rewatchability. How many times do I really want to see this over the course of my lifetime? And the answer on that is kind of not much. And this is like, I mean, it's one of those things where I can recognize that it's a good film. I just have no desire to really see it again. I wouldn't have watched it again if it wasn't for this podcast. It's sort of like 12 Years a Slave. I saw that once. I felt like that was enough for me. I kind of felt that with Dunkirk. I was like, saw it once, don't feel like I need to see it again. So because of that, the rewatchability factor is why it's so low for me, not because of anything the film does wrong, just because I don't really need to see it again. It's my number 8 on my list.
I think it got a Best Picture nomination. And is it his first directing nomination?
It's his only director nomination.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the only director nomination he has at the Academy Awards is for Dunkirk.
And it did get a Best Picture nomination as well, correct?
Yep, it's his second Best Picture nomination and first director nomination.
So what's our next one, Lee?
2020 with Tenet.
Oh, man.
That's a good expression. Oh, man.
So to find the audio description for Tenet, it's on the DVD, Prime Video, and iTunes. So this is my number 12. The first hour of this is brilliant. And then I feel like he goes a little too far into the concept and he loses me. And this is one that I finished, and then I actually, we got it from Redbox because pandemic. So I finished it, and then I actually rewatched the last hour like immediately, because I wanted to understand it, and I still couldn't understand it. The playing with time is great, but it's too much. The performances are great, but then, if the story's not there, I mean, nothing else really matters. So I do think the story gets not a little too complicated, way too complicated about halfway through the movie.
Yeah, I think Nolan definitely, I appreciate the fact that Nolan takes swings, it doesn't play it safe. And he constantly feels like he's pushing himself or he's making a choice to do something that feels different, and he's playing with the structure of film. And even though I'm not crazy about this film either, once again, fantastic soundtrack. He's gotten to a point now where he can get the best, DPs, he gets the best production designers and costume designers, he gets the best people who want to write scores for him. Like I feel like there are people who call up Steven Spielberg and say, can I please write a score for your film? And I feel like people do that for Nolan. And they're like, do you need me? Can I book myself in a couple of years for your, three projects out? Can I call dibs? I think people want to work with him. And I'm always intrigued by his acting choices. I think it's great that Robert Pattinson and John David Washington now have the ability to say, hey, we worked with Chris Nolan in a Chris Nolan film. This really just didn't work for me, though. I think it's a big risk for him, but I also think it's one of those things that is sort of a cautionary tale when nobody says no. At a certain point, when nobody says no and nobody comes back around to it, I think Tenet happens. I think Tenet is Chris Nolan was a little bit too in his head. And I feel like there were people who saw this and they probably didn't understand it either, but nobody wanted to tell him that, because the assumption is that I'm just stupid and you're brilliant. Like, it's my fault. I'm sorry. I must have done something wrong to not understand your movie. Because by this point, Chris Nolan, everything he's touched has been brilliant. So why wouldn't Tenet be brilliant? And then you're just like, it has to be me. I'm sure everybody around me knows what's going on, and I'm just the only one who's lost. But after the film was released, I think a lot of people were like, no, a lot of us are lost, actually. So I think sadly, I think this kind of has fallen down for a lot of people. It is my number 11. It's right above Following.
It is also my number 11. I think that this movie was just really convoluted, and I appreciate, to your point, John, the fact that Nolan does take bold risks. So I can appreciate the attempt, but it really didn't land. I think that he was trying to do too much in this film, and it was just going in so many different directions and just never fully came together in a way that was digestible. I mean, I know that some of Nolan's other films, it's like you wonder what actually happened or what to make of it after you first watch it, but at least you get the gist of it. Maybe, the last 5 to 10 minutes, you still need to unpack that a little bit more. But for this film, it was just so overly complicated. And I'm just like, we should not have to rack our brains this hard to get the gist of the story and of these concepts that Nolan is presenting. Production design, I give that credit. I think that there's some good production design in it. I think that the score is fantastic, as you mentioned. And I think that the actors were good. The only problem was the sound mixing was really hard to understand the dialogue, and they had masks on for part of the time in the movie, plus the sound mixing was just not at a level where you could clearly understand the dialogue. So that really didn't help anyone. After I got back from watching Tenet, I spent so much time on YouTube trying to understand what was going on and watching so many different videos. And I was usually good for the first half of the video when they were explaining things. And then I'm like, okay, now I'm lost again. I even Googled like Tenet for a 5-year-old on YouTube to see if anyone like boiled it down to that simple of a science. And there was nothing that was that simple. And I was like, if I could do that video, I would, but I don't understand it, so I can't. Not Nolan's best work, but a noble attempt. Still number 11 on my list.
Yeah, it was my first Chris Nolan film that I didn't get to see at all. I've only seen this with audio description. And I feel like really bad for narrators with this, because I have a feeling this was just an absolute cluster to try to figure out what is it I'm describing, what's happening here. Because it feels like in some scenes so much is happening. And you're like, what am I describing? I don't know. I feel like things are left on the table. And I would say that maybe I didn't understand it because I couldn't see it, except I've also listened to a lot of other YouTube critics, and they didn't really understand Tenet either. There's a large chunk of people out there that are excited that still don't know what this movie's about and completely understand it. I'm glad that there are people out there that think they know what it's about and are breaking the video down, but I just want to hear from Chris Nolan. I want Chris Nolan to sit down and explain it to me. I think he owes it to all of us. Just get him on YouTube for 15 minutes and be like, will you tell us what you're trying to do with Tenet, please? Like, explain yourself, sir. Kudos to the audio description team for what they were able to do with it.
Absolutely, because that was not an easy task at all. And now we come to the end of our Nolan films, which is the most recent film, 2023's Oppenheimer.
I mean, obviously, Oppenheimer, you can go see it in theaters, described in theaters, not in 70 millimeter because they can't do any accessibility because it's film. But if you go to digital, you can get audio description, closed captioning, all of that. I was very confused. And I'm sure I need to see it again, but it was an all white cast, all white men who look the same with older clothing. And then, he's time jumping and he doesn't tell you what the years are. And there's black and white and there's color. And I was very lost. And I'm sure I need to go see it again and I will appreciate it more. So Oppenheimer is my number 5 because there were scenes that did really work for me. The bomb test, the court scenes, that all worked. But I don't think I got the full picture yet. And I do attribute that to my vision. Even with the audio description, it was really hard. Because it's not like they tell you what year things happen, or they won't say, oh, this is Strauss's POV. They just say black and white. And you have to figure that out for yourself, which is great because they don't need to like spoon feed us. I think there was still visual things that I missed and I need to go back and see it again. And I haven't had time because it's a 3-hour movie, but hopefully I have a chance to digest it more before the Oscars come around. What did you guys think of it?
Actually, it's number 6 for me. I actually really liked Oppenheimer. It's tough for me because you guys actually got me to go to a movie theater to see this for this podcast, and I haven't been in a hot minute. The experience was not great. Had to send my headset back a couple times to get a working headset, and when I did, it sounded like my audio description was coming from beyond the grave. Like it was. It was cutting in and out, and it was faint.
What theater chain did you go to?
Regal. I went to a Regal movie theater. So, and the funny thing is, I was also a pain in the butt because I thought I was going to a theater I knew well, and I'd walked around as a sighted person. Well, they've completely decided to remodel the entire place, so I was dealing with construction on top of everything. I'm like, if you guys can spend like $1 million putting steps, can you have working audio description? Can the manager come to the theater to make sure the audio description equipment works before he just keeps handing me the same thing over and over? It was a little bit much, and it's why I don't go to theaters. It's because I get that I used to work there, and I know our equipment was broken. I used to work for Regal, and it was always broken, and it's still broken. It's still the equipment is still not good enough.
We find that the more often you go, the more they get it because they learn. But it is hard, like to keep, like if there's a theater that I hear doesn't do well, I make it a point to go there to like make sure they can get it right.
Yeah, but somebody has to train them. And the problem is, like with Regal, not to get totally off topic, but the problem with Regal is that a long time ago, they used to have their projectionists used to be manager level. It was a position, all projectionists were required to be managers, I guess for purposes of, I don't know, whatever they intended. Everybody was a manager. If you're in projection, you made manager. Then they reduced that and they dropped everybody back to staff level because by the time you get so many digital projectors up there, you don't have anybody really messing around too much with film. So you don't need, I don't even know who's trained up there anymore because everything kind of runs so automated that I think, you just have somebody who goes up there and makes sure that things are kind of flowing. But conceptually, I think the art of projection has been lost, which means people, when you say that there's a problem with this sort of technology, who's the person that knows? Who's the person who was trained by corporate? Because I think those positions have gone down a lot over the years. It's nice to see that there are some, like, yes, my movie theater has great audio description. Great, good for you. I'm so happy that exists out there. I just don't think it's not across the board. I want it to be, but I also don't want to take all this time out of my day to have to go to a theater and then get multiple headsets before one finally works. The other problem that I had was I was the only one in the theater with the person that I came with. Me and my companion were the only 2 people in the theater. It was like a 200-seat theater, and they left that volume at there would be 200 people in the theater. It was deafening, and I've had tinnitus since I've seen Oppenheimer. So it's been getting like slowly better. So I'm trying not to grade Oppenheimer on that level, but it was ridiculous. And I was wearing the headphones too, and I didn't think it was gonna be a problem, and I never had that kind of problem with a movie before, but it felt like my internal organs were shifting. It's that the volume was so incredibly loud that even with the fading in and out that I had on the audio description on the headsets, sometimes also the rumbling, his sound design is just, it felt unnecessary in some places. I just kind of got this sitting at 6 because I really want to see this when it finally comes to Peacock. It's a Universal film, so it'll be on Peacock later this year. And I really want to see what happens when I watch it sort of on the same level as I have been all these other Nolan films. What does it sound like when the audio track is normalized? Because I want to know what that experience is like. Because right now it's very weird. I love the film though. It's a great script and he got a lot of great actors in it. I'm trying not to be that person that immediately when I see something, I'm like, this is the best thing I've ever seen. I want to wait for a normalized sound experience before I can finally make that true opinion.
To share my thoughts on Oppenheimer, I loved this movie. I thought it was possibly Christopher Nolan's best directed film. I think that it was just so well done and had a very grand scale, especially for being a biopic. Like, you don't really expect a big scale for a biopic, but Nolan really pulled out all the stops, and the script, it did have a very Aaron Sorkin vibe. And it's crazy that it was like 3 hours of pretty much straight up dialogue, but the pacing of it just moved so rapidly. And they crammed in so much information and got through so much in that amount of time. And I didn't feel the length of the movie. It breezed along at a very good pace for my personal taste. I also didn't watch it with audio description because I saw it in 70 millimeter, and I tried getting an audio descriptive device just to see if it would actually work. Funny enough, though, it was playing audio description from another theater that had Oppenheimer. So on occasion, I would like check in with the audio description just to see what it was describing, but it definitely was not describing the things that were on my screen. So that was kind of funny. And in the midst of the audio description not being there for my viewing of this movie, because there was so much dialogue, I actually was able to follow it pretty well. I got the whole parallel, timelines with the different trials that were going on. I don't know if they put the year on the screen or not for like when they were flashing back to different things, but I understood where they were flashing back to. I'm like, okay, now they're in this part of his life. Now they're in this part of his life. And I was able to follow the progression of time and generally where we were at in the timetable of Oppenheimer's life and the events surrounding his life too. And then I went home and looked up a breakdown video just to make sure that what I thought was happening was actually happening. And I would say that I absorbed probably like 90 to 95% of it without AD. I would like to go back though and watch it with AD as well. So all that being said, I think that Oppenheimer is masterful and it's number 2 on my list. I loved this movie and I can't wait to watch it again.
It's funny because it's dense in like dialogue and script, whereas Interstellar and other ones are more dense in like a science-y and, concept way. And you're right. The script is very much Aaron Sorkin-esque. And his films are dense too, but like this film still makes you think in a Nolan way with a smart script, which is very, very cool.
And it is kind of crazy too. Like, I know one criticism I've heard of this movie is there's so many characters. And while I was not personally bothered by that, which is funny because in Inception, I was bothered by that. Here, for whatever reason, I didn't mind. And I don't know why.
No, that is interesting. And I think before we have an Oscar conversation with John later in the year, definitely need to revisit it because I really want to get that experience that you had, Lee. I think we were talking off mic, but you were saying you really have to pay attention, and you do. Like, if you miss something, you might be lost for the rest of the movie. So, but yeah, why don't we go through and say our full ranks, and then we can do our sign off. So, Lee, do you want to do yours bottom to top to let people know?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So number 11 is Tenet. Number 10 is Dunkirk. Number 9 is Inception. Number 8 is The Dark Knight Rises. Number 7 is Insomnia. Number 6, Batman Begins. Number 5, Interstellar. Number 4, The Prestige. Number 3, Memento. Number 2, Oppenheimer. And number 1 is The Dark Knight. And that is my Christopher Nolan rankings.
So for my final list, number 12 is Tenet. Number 11 is Following. Number 10 is Dunkirk. Number 9 is The Dark Knight Rises. Number 8 is Batman Begins. Number 7 is Insomnia. Number 6 is Memento. Number 5 is Oppenheimer. Number 4 is Interstellar. Number 3 is The Prestige. Number 2 is Inception. And number 1 is The Dark Knight.
And for me, number 12, Following. Number 11, Tenet. Number 10, Insomnia. Number 9, Batman Begins. Number 8, Dunkirk. Number 7, Interstellar. Number 6, Oppenheimer. Number 5, The Dark Knight Rises. Number 4, The Prestige. Number 3, Inception. Number 2, Memento. Number 1 is The Dark Knight.
Real quick, John, do you think your theater experience played into where you ranked Oppenheimer? Like, do you think when you see it again, it might rank higher?
No, I purposefully have tried to take myself out of that experience and not punish it for my sound, and to just grade it based on where I think it is after one viewing. Like I said, I tend to not immediately go, this is the best thing the director's ever done, especially for a director like Nolan. But I would say the same thing about like a Scorsese thing. Like when I see Killers of the Flower Moon, it may be great, but it's going to take me a hot minute before I'm willing to say this is the best Scorsese film of all time, because that's a daunting thing to say. That shouldn't be the films that man's done. That is fighting words to some people. So
yeah, we'll have to revisit the conversation when we get together for Oscars.
Also, I just want to take a moment to clarify, in case there's any confusion on my end about Oppenheimer. While I do think it's arguably Christopher Nolan's most well-directed film, I don't know if I would go as far as to say that it's his best film, just to make that distinction. Because I do still think The Dark Knight is his best film, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, and it's there's so much skill in his film, but then there's so much skill in so many of his films that it's really like it's a selfish choice. It doesn't, like, anybody could have. I'm actually really surprised we all have the same number one. I thought we were going to be fighting over number ones, but yeah, he's such a solid director where if we had a larger sampling of people, I'm sure the rankings would still be all over the place. I'm sure we would eventually find somebody who didn't have The Dark Knight at number one. So yeah, it's a tremendous director. I did want to give one shout out to somebody I forgot in Oppenheimer, because I did not know who was playing the role, and I'm not going to spoil it. I know some people are going to go to IMDb, but if you're listening to this and you go to watch Oppenheimer, tell me if you can tell who's playing Harry Truman. And if you can guess the name of that actor based on performance alone, especially if you're blind and you can't see who it is, good luck. That blew my mind when I looked at IMDb.
Oh,
blew
yeah.
my mind.
I feel you on that one.
Oh my God. I could have guessed 100 actors and I wouldn't have guessed him for that. So anyway.
Yeah, and I'd also like to give a shout out to sorry, I don't know the names of the other narrators, but Laura Post did Barbie and Oppenheimer. So shout out to her for booking both those gigs. It's pretty great. So John, where can people find you?
Please find me on YouTube. At Mac the Movie Guy our YouTube / Mac the Movie Guy is my channel.
And that's
give me a
MAC
subscribe
the movie
and
guy.
MAC the movie guy. Yeah, I'll just straight through one word. And that's also my website with .com after it, and Twitter, Instagram, and Threads. The more followers I get on those socials, the more I feel like I need to use them. It would encourage me to use them more. Plus, I'm also on Facebook in this lovely audio description community we have on Facebook. Join that if you love audio description and want to talk more about that. You'll find that on Facebook. I'll give them a shout out. And I want to give one last shout out, since I'm talking and nobody can cut me off, to the Audio Description Project, because what they do and what Fred Brack of the Audio Description Project does is hard but very important work, and sadly important work. It's something that shouldn't need to exist, but and hopefully, through podcasts like this and what I do on YouTube, and if we can get some more other people going, maybe one day we won't need an audio description project. But right now, I think it's a very useful tool for blind and audio description people. I hate using the term, but I can't think of anything else closer to say, but it's kind of like our green book in a way. It's like, these are the movies we get to watch, and these are where you can watch them. And it's very sad that we have a list like that. It's very sad that there are these titles that we're excluded from, that are not accessible to us, that somebody has made that decision and made that call. But I'm so glad that the American Council of the Blind has allowed this list to exist. We've used it to tell everybody where they can find these films. And obviously the list is constantly changing because films change streaming services all the time. And Fred Brack runs that, and he does a fantastic job of keeping things updated. So I always give him a shout out at the end of every single one of my videos, and I definitely want to give him a shout out here on the podcast. So.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Fred. I email Fred every so often when I find something that's not listed on there that does happen. Usually it's a Blu-ray or something that Paramount puts out or something, so I'll email him all the time. He's really great. The audio description project is a vital tool. We will definitely link that in the description, especially for this episode, because we were talking about it so much.
Yep.
But yeah, and you can follow, we will give you a follow from our show Instagram and personal also. But you can follow us on Instagram as well at Darkroom Filmcast. And if you have any questions or you just want to tell us your Nolan ranking, feel free to email us darkroomfilmcast@gmail.com. And also, if you want to be added to the audio description Facebook group and you are having trouble finding it, you can email us and we will send you a link.
And a special shout out to Matt Louderbuck and All Senses Go for making transcripts of this episode and all other episodes possible. Really appreciate his work with that. Well, John, thank you once again so much for being here. This has been so much fun talking about Christopher Nolan with you. And we look forward to talking Oscars with you in the next couple of months.
Yeah, absolutely. I know someone's going to TIFF apparently, so I expect to hear some results from that experience when we start talking about the Oscars, if somebody's going to have some inside information.
Yeah, and hopefully there's a good amount with audio description, so we'll see.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, I'm really excited to do that. And I love talking film with anybody who loves to talk film. And I love talking about it in a way that is constructive, and we're all visually impaired or blind. And yes, we can do that. We can have cohesive thoughts about film. We didn't just all decide to stop watching TV and film as soon as our mission depleted.
No,
We're
exactly.
still doing it.
You love
You
love what you love. And one of my favorite things actually now is taking my cane with me to go to the movies, because I just imagine people seeing me walk through the lobby and they're like, wait, how does he watch a movie? I just love imagining people with that puzzling thought.
I do the same thing. And yeah, I'm sure people wonder as well. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time here on The Dark Room.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And thank you, John.
Thank you for having me.